On the 24th of March 1794, the Madeleine Cemetery in Paris was closed. Inside of the graveyard were the remains of thousands of people, many of whom had lost their heads on the guillotine during the French Revolution, and also during the Reign of Terror that came after. But two of the most prominent people who were buried there were the King of France, Louis XVI, and his queen and wife, Marie Antoinette, the deposed French monarchy who lost their heads in favour of a revolutionary republic. The burial of the pair was hastily done and was quick, and there were attempts to begin with to keep the grave location a secret, but it quickly became one of the worst kept secrets inside of France. People arrived to the cemetery to tour the grave, and people even from foreign lands came to pay their respects to the executed king and queen. But Marie Antoinette was buried twice, and she was subjected to an exhumation before she was laid to rest in a final grave and tomb, where she still is today. And to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. On the 16th of October 1793, the widowed former Queen Consort of France, Marie Antoinette, was taken from her prison cell to the Place de la Révolution in Paris. She was to be executed for many crimes, including defrauding the treasury and treason against the French people. She lived a very luxurious lifestyle, but her execution was one that nobody could have seen coming. She was led out to the guillotine in a cart and was wearing white, and the crowds jeered and booed her, and also threw things. She seemed in a trance, as if nothing could bother her, as she contended with her mind in her final moments. When she arrived at the foot of the scaffold, she was helped up, and she actually stood on the executioner's foot, and these were her final words. "Pardon me, sir, I did not mean it." It was a rather strange final statement from a woman who throughout her life had so much to say. The executioners worked quickly and swiftly, and they strapped her to the wooden board and fixed this in place below the guillotine blade. After a few checks of the blade, it was released, and her head was taken clean off by this. In some images and paintings from the time, they show that her head was being paraded around on a pike to the crowds who were there in their thousands. However, after the execution, her head and body were placed back on a cart, and they were led to the Madeleine Cemetery, the very place where her husband had been buried just months before. This cemetery was the place where lots of victims of the guillotine were thrown in a roughly dug grave, and as the guillotine blade fell upon her neck, there were already gravediggers working at the cemetery on the whole to bury the queen. Her body was taken into the cemetery, along with her head, and the gravediggers actually had a slight break in completing the job, which allowed Madame Tussaud to take a plaster cast and mould of the executed queen's face, and she from this then sculpted a waxwork figure of the queen to appease the revolution. After the grave was dug, the queen's body was placed inside of the grave, and to add insult to injury, in a final act of disgrace, Marie's head was placed between her legs, and this was done to show that the person had died a shameful death. For some decades, the grave of Marie Antoinette remained inside the Madeleine Cemetery, but lots of people knew its location, and some had tours of where she had been laid to rest, and decorations were placed around the gravesite. One visitor to the grave claimed, "On the 4th of September, 1814, I visited the sacred place which contains the remains of our sainted king, Louis XVI, and his virtuous and unfortunate queen, Marie Antoinette. Thanks to the care of M. Delacaux and his daughters, good Frenchmen can come to this place and find consolation. Mademoiselle Delaclos was pleased to accompany you. Her gentle and sorrowful voice inspires sacred respect for these martyrs. This cemetery is the Rue d'Anjou and is called the Madeleine Cemetery. A grave at one end of the garden contains 133 bodies buried on the 6th of June 1770, those killed on the 31st of May at the fireworks held to celebrate the marriage of Louis and Marie Antoinette. Another grave, adjoining the garden, has the bodies of 4 priests and 500 Swiss guards killed on the 10th of August. A third grave contains 500 further Swisses. The tomb of Louis XVI was placed here on the 21st of January 1973 at 10:30 in the morning. A pit of 8 feet depth was dug and a great deal of quicklime placed in it. The body of the king was placed into a wooden coffin with quicklime on top. On the 16th of October 1793, the body of the queen, his wife, was buried near to him with a similar quantity of quicklime. But with the slight restoration of the French Bourbon monarchy, there were discussions as to exhume Marie and her husband. This began in the January of 1815, and the Queen's remains were found on the first day that digging began. Her grave was found very easily, and a layer of quicklime had solidified over the coffin, which actually preserved her relatively well. Some bones were found, including her skull, which was relatively intact. The workers also discovered her stockings, which she had been given in the conciergerie prison before her execution, as well as 2 elastic garters, and shockingly, some of the Queen's hair in the grave and on the skull. It was claimed that, after the workmen, several of whom had witnessed the interment of the Queen, had opened to the depth of 5 feet, a space 10 feet in length by 5 or 6 in breadth, we found a bed of lime 10 or 11 inches deep, which we ordered to be removed with the greatest care. Under this bed we distinctly perceived the outline of a coffin about 5 foot 6 inches in length. Following these traces, we discovered in the depth of the lime several pieces of board still fastened together. In this coffin we found a number of bones, but several were wanting, having undoubtedly been reduced to dust. The skull was entire, and its position indicated incontestably that it had been severed from the body. We also found remains of clothing, and particularly 2 elastic garters, in good preservation. The whole were placed in a chest and locked up. In another chest we deposited the earth and lime found mixed with the bones. Many people who witnessed the exhumation fainted and burst into tears. The workers then placed these items into a chest, and they placed into a second chest the remains of the Queen, mixed with earth and also quicklime. The chests were then moved and were processed by candlelight. The king's remains were found later, but then the decision was made to inter the former king and queen in a better manner inside of the Basilia of St. Denis, which had become almost a royal mausoleum. The coffins and wooden chests contained the bones were then processed with pomp and ceremony. The king and queen were given a huge reburial ceremony inside of the large cemetery, and this was a huge celebration, and it was claimed that when all these attendants had taken their places, the service commenced. The princes and princesses, followed by the Grand Master and Master of the Ceremonies, and their assistants, approached the altar to present their offerings, after which a funeral oration was delivered by the Bishop of Troyes. The absolution having been pronounced, the bodies were lowered into the royal vault, into which Monsieur and 2 princes, his sons, descended and prostrated themselves upon the coffins of the royal relatives. Salutes of artillery were fired at the moment when the procession set out from Paris, during the service at St. Denis, and when the bodies were lowered into the vault. To perpetuate the memory of these august victims, the king had ordained that solemn funeral services shall be performed annually and in all churches of the kingdom on the 21st of January for the repose of the soul of Louis XVI, and on the 16th of October for that of his royal consort, and that on these days the court shall wear mourning, and the public offices, courts of justice, exchange, and theatres be closed. Today, the grave of Marie Antoinette is found inside of the Basilia of St. Denis. She was lowered into the royal vault, and today her grave is marked by a tombstone that says Marie Antoinette of Austria, Reine de France et de Navarre, 1755 to 1793. This is a simple black marble slab with gold lettering, and it is similar to the other royals buried there. Marie Antoinette is remembered as a queen of France who paid the ultimate price in the face of the French Revolution. She was subjected to a brutal execution at the hands of people who hated her, and she went the same way as her husband did. But she was buried twice and today is laid to rest inside of a huge cathedral that gives her role in history a significant amount of recognition compared to her initial burial amongst the ordinary folk of France inside of the Madeleine Cemetery, and she had been buried there in disgrace. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.